Hi, welcome to Journey to Justice. I'm Eiko Kosasa, and I'll be interviewing Momiala Kamahele today. She is a Kumu Hula, master hula teacher and practitioner, and an assistant professor of Hawaiian Studies at Leeward Community College in Pearl City, Hawaii. Kamahele is known for her cultural analysis from a Hawaiian nationalist point of view, a perspective that acknowledges the historical facts of the 1893 U.S. overthrow of the independent Hawaiian Kingdom and its continued occupation of this island nation. Today is the first of a two-part interview. So, Momi, can you share a little bit about your background, like where you were born and raised?
In the generally when you introduce yourself, a lot of times it's what you do, yeah. And at least for me, and I think, and I know that this comes from the Hawaiian culture, is you talk about who you are, and you talk about who you are based on your genealogy and your connection to the place. So my genealogy spans basically 3 islands. My father is from Hawaii Island, Puna. The Kamahele family's homeland is in Puna. In fact, the area is called Maku'u. And I remember growing up and in fact, it was drummed into us, wherever you meet a Kamahele, you related to them. Yeah. So if you meet one, you're related to them somehow.
Yeah.
And sure enough, over the course of my life, and now even in my classroom, I come across people who, when they know my last name, ask me, so which Kamahele are you? And then I'll go, well, which Kamahele are you? But we all know that we're related. We come from Hawaii Island, Puna. And then my mom's side is actually from Wailuku, Maui, the Kealaluhi family. So Maui, and then my mom actually was born and grew up on this island, Oahu. I like to say that I was born on homestead land, Kiokaha, and I currently reside on homestead land in Waianae. And I went to a Hawaiian school for 13 years. I went to Kamehameha. So I'm one of those rare birds.
Lifers.
Lifers, yeah, we're the lifers.
Yeah.
From kindergarten to 12th grade, and that was my world. I had Hawaiian parents who brought me up in a Hawaiian environment, and what that means is you learn by watching and doing. You keep this shut, and you keep this wide open, and you keep your ears wide open, and that's how you learn. So that was my whole world. And then I went to college, University of Hawaii, and the world was different. You have to ask questions, you have to respond, you have to be articulate, you have to da-da-da, all of that kind of stuff. So it was a challenging world. And for a very long time, I didn't know my history. I didn't know we had a nation. I didn't know. I heard of somebody called a queen, and there were several queens. I think when I came of age in the 1960s and throughout the 1970s, I didn't know my history. I knew more about who George Washington and Abraham Lincoln was than I did know who Kamehamehas the third, fourth, and fifth were. And it wasn't until I decided I went to college right after high school. I did great the first year, didn't do well after that. In fact, my favorite subject was history. I flunked out of history. I didn't do well. I did great the first year, but then, life intervened, and I wanted to travel. I was young, single, and I wanted to get off the islands and see the world. But there was always that schooling in the back of my mind. So when I had my daughter, got married, I decided I need to go back to school. And I can remember the exact moment when I made that decision.
Wow.
And that was when CNN was just about created. And I don't remember the year, but I remember turning on the TV and I remember listening to this 24-hour news network, CNN, this new thing called CNN. And I was listening to the news and I thought, I don't know what they're talking about. You know, I felt really ignorant and I went, oh boy, girl, you got to get back to school and figure it out. But even before that, during the 1970s, there was the so-called Hawaiian Renaissance, you know, this flowering of the Hawaiian culture. And there were people involved in land struggles that I knew that I thought, well, what are they doing? So, you know, that coupled with that CNN experience, I thought, wow, you got to get back to school. So after the small little stint at Manoa, University of Hawaii at Manoa, I went into the travel business. I thought, wow, how cool is that, man? I can sell tours, you know, plus I can go on tours and they're really cheap. And so that's how I got to travel. Traveled all around the world, met all kinds of different people, and largely it had to do with being a cultural practitioner of hula. And I had studied hula since I was about 10 years old. And, you know, took that skill, took that culture, and it afforded me the opportunity to travel. It afforded me the opportunity also to feed my family. I was the hula hula girl in all those hula hula shows, the luau shows in the hotels in Waikiki. And I always felt uncomfortable, whether it was in the travel business or in the entertainment business, because I always felt like there's got to be more than this. You know, loved my family. You know, I figured there's a reason why I'm here. And I never really figured it out in my 20s. And it probably wasn't until I came back to school in the early part, when I was maybe 32, 33, that I started to take classes. You know, I was a single mom, raising a child, in my 30s, you know, trying to figure all of this stuff out. And, you know, I didn't grow up aspiring to be a teacher. You know, that was the farthest thing from my mind. I wanted to have fun. That's what I wanted to do, you know? I saw my parents' generation as working hard and you got to sacrifice and okay, you know, I don't begrudge that, but I didn't want that. You know, I wanted to have fun. But then at the same time, I realized I also want to know. You know, I want to know stuff. And so I, you know, made the journey to come back to school. I actually started because I had no self-confidence. I figured I must be stupid. I must be very ignorant. So I said, okay, I'm going to start at the very basic level in terms of academics. So when I came back to school, I took like English 21, 22. You know, I wanted to have such a good foundation that as I went through university, you know, I wouldn't miss anything. Yeah. But what I realized was, well, you know, you're pretty smart. You know, as I moved through college, and I started at Leeward Community College. So I left here. Actually, the counselor said, you know, you've been here long enough. You should move on. I said, no, I don't want to. I said, because now I have to pay for parking. And sure enough, you know, I remember my first semester at Manoa, I hated it. I couldn't find parking in the structure. I had to hunt for parking. I missed my classes. But, you know, after that first semester, I got over it because the classes, you know, I started taking were really exciting. The teachers were cool, you know. Many of them were my generation. And I went, wow, it began to open my mind. And then I got this letter from the honors program. And the honors, you know, they invited you to be in the program and you had to take certain classes. And I think that this is where my turning point in terms of my political consciousness happened. And it was the honors program offered this course. And you could choose. And when I looked at the list, one of the classes said Women in Storytelling. Dang, I remember the title today. Women in Storytelling. And when I looked at this, and in the meantime, I'm trying to figure out, what I'm going to major in.
Yeah.
I looked at this class and I went, wow, this sounds kind of interesting. And you know how introductions are real, they're kind of vague.
Yeah.
A survey of blah, blah, blah. So I thought, oh, women in storytelling, this sounds really interesting. And I don't remember what the books were. And I thought, oh, these books are really interesting. 1 week before class began, the teacher calls and says, I want you to read the Bible. And I'm on the phone and I'm thinking, okay, do I really want to take this class? But I listen and she says, I want you to read the book of Genesis. She says, and we'll start a discussion about women in storytelling. And when I hung up, I started to think, okay, well, this sounds kind of interesting, I think. So, I went to the Bible and I looked at it again. The first day of class, man, we hit the ground running and I never turned back. And the woman is Christina Backleglia in the English department.
Yeah.
And I think she was just hired by the English department. And she was this young, vibrant Italian woman, who was very gracious. And just, by the end of the semester, my feminine consciousness had exploded. All the myths and all the feelings I had about why I feel so bad being a woman, not to mention the fact that I was a woman of color, but it began to unravel and reveal some of the feelings I had, for example, about being this woman in a patriarchal society. Now I have the words to explain that.
Right.
Back then, if you had asked me about what patriarchal and matriarchal and all that feminist stuff was, I would have gone, what? Talking about. But now, I began to get the language to which I could attach the feeling.
Yeah.
And that's where I went, wow. So, and over the years, she's become my mentor, So she was actually the first.
Wow.
And that's where, when I began to think about this, where did it begin? And I always sort of use her as an example of, becoming aware of, but it was really a political explosion that happened in my mind for that semester, because we really had an interesting group of students. I don't remember them all, and I want to say maybe there was 15 of us, and it was a more seminar type setting. But I remember us talking about the book of Genesis, but I also remember us talking about Eve,
Right.
And her position in the story, and how over time she's sort of taught as this bad person, and it was because of her that women suffer today. And so what I learned in this class was this is all part of the narrative, the narrative of women, and why in a patriarchal society women are placed in this secondary position. It has a long history, and as we went through the class, I remember, I like to say that it was original by me, but it wasn't. It was somebody in the class, and that person in the class says, well, Eve was actually the more powerful, and here I'm paraphrasing, of the two. And we all kind of, looked at this person, what do you mean? Well, she was the one who had the nerve to defy the snake, or to actually defy God.
Right.
And be tempted, well, not really tempted by the snake, but actually she was the one who took action.
Yeah.
Not Adam. He was just kind of sitting there going, no, this person's analysis of it. And we all kind of went, well, here's a different shift in your perspective about looking at this story.
Yeah.
And women in this particular story.
Yeah.
So by the end of the semester, and we looked at other stories, but that's what's really stayed in my mind. This professor who called me before school started, wanted me to do homework already, and I went, I don't know about this, but man, I'm glad I took her class.
And so then how did you go from that? Because it's like a reawakening of, looking at the world, you can like look at it from a different perspective. It's not one narrative, right? Yeah. How did that lead to going into history and studying, Hawaiian Studies?
I went to a rally. Oh, what is that place called at Manoa with the steps? What is that?
Campus Center.
Campus Center, okay. And I was with a friend, and it was to hear how Nanike Trask and Lili Kala talk. And I forget why we went there before then. There was something else that was happening. I think it was a presidential candidate's supporters or something. So then the next time to go to this sort of rally was to hear these two women speak. And I had heard of Hananike. I hadn't yet really gotten to know Lili Kala yet, but I went there. And I forget what the issue was. I'm sure it was some Hawaiian issue. But, I mean, she was very...
She is who?
I'm sorry, Hananike. Yeah, what startled me and at the same time impressed me was, man, she's a woman. And she's Hawaiian. And she can, wow, to borrow a phrase, speak truth to power. Yeah. And I looked at that and I went, holy mackerel. My friend who was standing next to me said, Jesus, I wonder why she's so mad. And I turned to my friend and I said, I want to know why she's mad. So I signed up for her class the next semester. Wow. And that was another, turning point, that rally, that them on the steps talking about some issue. I don't remember what it was. And that pushed me because I wanted to know why. How come she's so mad? How come she's so... And it wasn't that she was mad. It was that she was a woman and Hawaiian and articulate. Yeah. And so I took a class. I hadn't declared my major yet. And her class was Myths of Hawaiian History. And of course, in the back of my mind, I thought, I'm going to learn about Pele and all this mythological literature and stuff. Right. No way. The first day of class, I think there were maybe 15 of us. It was a gigantic lecture class. First day of class, walks into class. She puts her stuff down on the table and she says, if you think that this is a literature class that has to do with mythology, and she went down the list, she says, it's not. Please leave. And I went, whoo, I'm staying. When somebody tells me, to scatter, to leave, I want to stay. So that was another ride. Yeah. And so what we came to understand was she was talking about political myths. How stories, again, the women in storytelling, how stories are told and they become part of our consciousness that we don't examine or criticize and we internalize over time. And so one generation internalizes that narrative from the power structure, and we pass that on to our children in so many different ways, in the games we play with them, in how we approach them, and in how we raise them, that these myths become so natural as part of our life that well, that's the way it is. Of course, that's the way it's supposed to be, Right. So what she helped me do, what Hananike helped me do, was to take apart the myth. And because of her class and looking at political myths, I took that theory of the myth that tells you your history was bad, your people were bad. I took that whole theory, and I was in the honors program, and I had to write a thesis. And at the same time, I was taking history classes. And one of the things I noticed in the history text, especially Kaikenol's, was he characterized Kamehameha V as despotic and a tyrant, and there was something about that I thought, well, why? How come? So I used Hananike's class, that Myths of Hawaiian History, and the theory we had learned there, and I looked at the life of Kamehameha V, and I put the two together, and I went, he's an example of a story created that he is the despot and tyrannical and all of this kind of thing, when there's lots of evidence to suggest that it was totally not that. Yeah. And a big part of that was learning the language, So I had to learn the language. Yeah. And then that became another, turning point in my life. Why is it that here I am, almost full-blooded Hawaiian. How come I don't speak my language? I never questioned that before. But I remember when I was little, my two grandfathers, one from Hilo and one from here, every holidays, the one from Hilo would fly down, and they would get together, and they would play cards, and they would talk in Hawaiian. And I remember every time they got together, I would say, Papa, teach me Hawaiian. No good you teach Hawaiian. Oh, you learn Hawaiian. And but you speak it. You know, I was young, I was innocent.
Right.
I said, I want to speak Hawaiian. No good you speak Hawaiian. I go to a Hawaiian school, and I tell them I want to take Hawaiian classes. They go, no, you can't get a job. Take French. So, you know, I had all of this resistance against my own culture.
Yeah.
And, you know, you never question it. But then when I go back to school, I take Christina's class, I take Hanani K's class, and I'm taking all of these classes. My political consciousness gets even more filled with stuff that I get angrier and angrier, you know. So I put together that political theory. I look at the life of Kamehameha, and I put together this, you know, very small thesis to suggest that he wasn't the despot, that this was a story, a myth that was created to make the Hawaiian culture seem like taking words from Gugi wa Tiango, vast wasteland of non-achievement, you know. And when I began to understand that, I got really angry. I thought, oh my God. And I remember sitting, you know, in class with Hananiki, and I go, you know, the monolith that was built for me is now shattered in pieces. What do I do now? She looked me straight in the eye. She says, pick it up and put it together the way you want to. I can do that? I went, I can do that. Of course I can do that. You know?
Yeah.
So then
But it must have been powerful to put all these pieces together as you were writing it.
Yeah. Putting it all together as I'm getting mad. And amazing. I remember, you know, surrounding myself with people who kept telling me, you know, you got to channel your anger in a positive direction. Of course, intuitively I knew that, but I also understood was, you know, leave me alone. I have to get through the anger first, okay?
Yeah.
Let me get through the anger. Let me be mad. And then I'll come out on the other side, okay? I mean, you know, I'm not going to go out and, you know, beat anybody up or whatever, but I just need to have that emotion that's been pent up for, you know, over, how old was I? In my 30s, you know, 3 decades. I need for that to have some release. Yeah. You know, and then come out on the other side and go, okay. I mean, I remember being mad at my parents. You know, they didn't know. But as my consciousness exploded and it opened up, you know, I said, well, why didn't my parents do anything about this? You know, about colonialism, explain all of this to me, about our oppression, you know, about our history. And then I realized, oh, okay, you know, their generation came out of the World War II generation. It was great to be an American. Right. You know, America offered prosperity. You could buy a house, you got a job, you know, and after 25, 30 years, you'd be on top of the world because you retire, you could do anything you want. You know, there again, that's the myth, that's the story, the narrative that you get told until you peel open that layer and you go, uh-oh, not so, you know, not so. So after Hawaiian Studies, in the meantime, I'd been taking some history classes because there were people that I came to know who were in history, other Hawaiians. Turns out we went to the same school. We were born on the same island, the Big Island. Excuse me. And they were already in history, was John Osorio and Kanalu Young. And I became their friends. We were in seminars together. So I decided to major in history. And as I took that journey with, you know, these men and other like-minded people, it was about the same time that the sovereignty movement was beginning in the 80s. And in the 90s when the Center for Hawaiian Studies was being built. So I was kind of in this sort of this vortex of academically becoming politically aware, but also involved in actual protests, you know, actual defense of my culture, defense of my history, you know, being involved in the community, going to rallies because I wanted to know, okay, what is the issue? Well, you got to come over here and learn about, okay, so you go down and you go, oh, okay, wait now, okay, some issue, so what do? Well, you go and protest. Well, what does that mean? Wow, really? You can make signs and you can, you know, free speech. You make your sign, and it was empowering. I remember the first one had to do with the philosophy department and how they were charging Haunani K with, I forget what his name was. What the heck was that?
Yeah.
And what was
Joey
happening?
Carter.
Yeah, the administration was saying that this professor was allowing, this issues to sort of, I don't know if I'm using the right words here, sort of, she was placing this judgment on a student. And in fact, I know what it was. He didn't like being called a haole.
Right.
And so Haunani K responded in a public newspaper because he had written an article in a public newspaper, the colonial, about that word and about that he didn't like being called this. So Haunani K, as a professor, to educate the student and the larger community about what haole meant. Haole originally meant foreigner. And so she proceeded to go into this very long history about haole oppression from the sugar planters and even before from Cook in the response in a public newspaper, and essentially in her own style said that if you don't like it, then go home. Well, that created this gigantic uproar. So part of my education wasn't just in the classroom. Part of my education and political consciousness being raised was also practical experience. Taking something I learned in the classroom about my history that I didn't know and looking at the history of that word and why people who are haole have a problem with it, and then educating through protest. So to me, it's one thing to be an academic and sit and read all this wonderful stuff and talk about racism or talk about oppression. But it's a whole nother thing to take what you've learned and do something about it. My father was always very adamant about people who just talk. He called that waha. Oh, they just talk. The old folks, talk. What are they doing? I never understood when my father would say that. Now I do, as a politically aware adult. Now I know what he means. It's one thing to say something, but it's another thing to take it and put it into action.